Greetings, everyone. In the sermon today, I would like to address a subject that some have used to confuse and divide the Church of God over the last 10 to 15 years. It's a subject that stirs up emotion, sometimes very strong feelings. But I'd like to show in the sermon today that many of the opinions and the arguments about this subject are based on a very narrow view of the subject. These ideas and opinions are really not based on what the Scriptures actually reveal, but on assumptions and on ideas that some would like to read into the Scriptures. I think we'll see whenever we look at the big picture at what a number of lines of evidence actually reveal about the subject, that this issue will become pretty clear. What I'd like to do then in the sermon today is address the subject of the falling away and the revealing of the man of sin. This is the subject of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, the Apostle Paul predicts that two major events will precede the return of Jesus Christ. The first event is the falling away, and we'll define in the sermon what that actually is. The second event is the appearance of the man of sin. This is an individual that's going to play a major role on the world scene, as we will see. If we look at the Scripture, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, you might want to check this in your Bible so that you are on the same page that I am, that we're reading the same verse. It says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day," that is the day of Jesus Christ's return, "will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed," and this man is referred to as the son of perdition. The question is, has the falling away already occurred? There's some that believe that this is already over, it's already past, but we want to ask the question today in the sermon, has that falling away already occurred, or is that something that is going to come yet in the future? There are a number of ideas about this subject of the falling away. The Philadelphia Church of God, led by Gerald Flurry, they've stated in the booklet written by Mr. Flurry, Malachi's Message, that the falling away happened when the worldwide Church of God apostasy occurred. And this was about 1995, actually was building up before that. And he also suggests that the man of sin that Paul is talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 was Joseph de Koch, who was leading the church at that time. Mr. Flurry published his book about 1990. It's come out in several other editions. But this is a position that he's made very clear. The Restored Church of God, led by Mr. David Pack, has stated that the falling away in the worldwide Church of God was prophesied nearly 2,000 years ago, and it involved almost 280 doctrinal changes, and that the worst part of the falling away is now behind the church. In other words, he feels that Paul was talking about the falling away in 2 Thessalonians 2 as what happened in the worldwide Church of God. Some in the greater Church of God assume that the falling away can only be from the Church of God and cannot apply to Protestants or Catholics or anybody else because they've supposedly already fallen away from the truth. We're going to look at these three ideas in the presentation that we're going to look at today. Whether or not the falling away that Paul talks about was within the Church of God, if it has already taken place, or if it's something yet to happen in the future. When we examine the position that Mr. Flurry had, and it was published about 1990, again, almost 22, 23, 24 years ago, he was suggesting that Mr. de Koch was the man of sin. This is simply not correct, because as we will see, the Apostle Paul mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2 and also in other places that the man of sin is going to be involved with or doing mighty miracles. Mr. de Koch did not do any great miracles. So that really doesn't fit with the description of what Paul was talking about. Was the falling away in the Church of God the prophesied end-time falling away? Is the worst behind us? We're going to look at these assumptions and these assertions, and we're going to see that there are some problems with these things. What I'd like to do in the sermon is to examine the question, is there a more context-appropriate and historically significant understanding of the end-time apostasy or falling away? You know, what Paul was talking about in 2 Thessalonians can't be taken out of context. Paul says he follows Jesus Christ in his understanding of things. So we're going to look at this in the sermon today. What I'd like to do first is to ask the question, what did Mr. Armstrong write and say about the falling away? Many people today like to think they're following exactly what Mr. Armstrong taught, but whenever we look at the subject of the falling away and what Mr. Armstrong taught, it's quite interesting and quite revealing. We'll look at a couple of quotes. The first one is from a co-worker letter written on November 11th, 1949. Mr. Armstrong is talking about the subject. He said, Christ foretold a turning away from his message. Paul prophesied that there would be a great falling away from Christ's true message, and that popular churches would turn away from the truth and believe fables. So Mr. Armstrong is talking about something quite big. Something quite big. Garner Ted Armstrong wrote in a Good News article, September 1957, Jesus foretold a worldwide apostasy and a falling away from the truth. And he's quoting a number of verses out of Matthew 24, where the disciples had asked Christ, what's going to be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And then Jesus said, you watch for a number of things, including false teachers that will be doing miracles. He said this would happen just before he returned. Mr. Armstrong, in another article in 1957 and in a later edition, 1973, again talking about Jesus Christ and linking Christ's message with Paul's message, said Jesus and the apostles foretold a falling away from the truth on the part of the great majority, prophesying a popular, universal falling away from the faith once delivered. To the Thessalonians, Paul stated, and then he quotes 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. But Mr. Armstrong is talking about a great majority, a popular universal falling away from the faith once delivered. From the faith once delivered. Mr. Armstrong again wrote in a Good News article in 1960, the apostasy was prophesied, a great falling away, the whole world was to be deceived. So Mr. Armstrong is not applying 2 Thessalonians 2:3 to something that just happened in the Church of God, to a small, relatively small number of people. He's applying this to a great falling away and that the whole world would be deceived. And of course, that's what John talks about in Revelation 12:9, that Satan has deceived the whole world. And that deception is going to culminate as we get close to the end of the age. In a radio broadcast in 1982, Mr. Armstrong also addressed this subject. He says, has the falling away happened? That doesn't mean a few people. It doesn't mean a few radicals or fanatics. The whole world was to be deceived. There you are. Now, my friends, the great falling away that your Bible said is coming. So again, Mr. Armstrong is talking about a great falling away that's going to impact the whole world. This is what Mr. Armstrong has written and said on a number of occasions about 2 Thessalonians 2:3. He did not apply it to something that would just affect the Church of God. In a summary statement, Mr. Richard Ames has made the observation that Mr. Armstrong did not limit the falling away to just genuine church members who know the truth and would fall away. Now, it doesn't exclude that, but it doesn't limit that. Mr. Armstrong applied that term to the whole world, and even popular churches would turn away from the truth. Obviously, Mr. Armstrong saw a duality, and so does Mr. Ames, and so do we, that there is a duality, that the church would be affected by various things, but that is not the ultimate fulfillment of what Paul was talking about. So let's look at the verse again. So we want to keep this in front of our mind. Paul says, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, that is the day of Christ's return, will not come unless the falling away comes first. Something's going to happen first. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Now, Paul is linking these two things together. He's not talking about one thing happening at one point in time and then maybe 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, something else will happen. He's linking these two events together as something that will happen, or things that will happen just before the return of Jesus Christ. That's why it's going to be a sign that Christ's coming is near. In looking at the falling away, the subject, we want to look at what the Scriptures actually reveal. Not something that we assume that it's saying, but what the Scriptures actually reveal. Not just 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, but what did Jesus Christ talk about? What did the Apostle John talk about later in the book of Revelation? All these things should really fit together. We're also going to look at what other Bible resources say. What commentaries say? What do other commentaries say about these particular verses? What do Bible dictionaries say? What is the scholarship that focuses on these verses? Again, sometimes within the Church of God, we tend to look at things in kind of a narrow way, and it can only be this way. But other people have studied these verses for literally centuries, and there are some things we can learn when we look at the big picture. Also, what does history indicate? What does history actually indicate happened in the past, and where do things begin to point whenever we look at the future? So we're going to try and take a big picture look at this subject today. And we're going to consider a number of items. We're going to define what the falling away actually is. We can look at the words that define that are translated that way, the Greek and the Hebrew words. What do they tell us? What can we learn from what is actually recorded in the Scriptures? We're going to look at some different translations of this phrase, the falling away. And it can be translated in ways that make it even more clear than what we assume. The different translations do shed light on the meaning of this verse. We'll also be looking at what commentaries say, what people that have studied the verses have to say about those verses. And I think we can't assume that it's saying something when it does not fit the context. We're also going to be looking at some examples of New Testament and Old Testament scriptures where the word apostasy is used, or apostasia in the Greek, where that word is used, and also some words in the Old Testament that can be translated apostasy. We're going to be looking at duality and types in prophecy. Again, we want to take a big picture look at the subject, and we'll also give some examples. We'll look at 3 specific examples that could qualify as a falling away. As we will see, not everything really does qualify. So this is the big picture that we want to look at in the sermon today. And I want to do this in the spirit of 2 Thessalonians, or actually it's 1 Thessalonians 5:21, of proving all things, examining everything and then holding fast to those things that are right and true. So again, let's go back to the subject, 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of Christ's return, will not come unless these 2 things occur. A falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Okay, let's look at some translations of the word, or definitions of the word apostasia. It's interesting whenever you look at an older Strong's Concordance and you look at a newer Strong's Concordance. The word apostasia in the 1967 edition of Strong's is defined as a falling away, to forsake something, an apostasy, a defection from the truth. A defection from the truth. You'll notice that from the truth was italicized, which means that this is added to this definition. The phrase from the truth is not found in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3 it only says a falling away will occur. It doesn't say a falling away from the truth. And that's going to be important as we look at the big picture. This concept of falling away from the truth comes from Strong's Concordance. In a more recent edition of Strong's, you'll notice the definition of apostasia is slightly different. It says a turning away, a rebellion. You're rebelling against something. An abandonment. You abandon a former position. You abandon a former belief. It can also be translated or defined as apostasy, a falling away, or to forsake. So there's some overlap in these definitions, but there's also some interesting differences. Let's look next at a couple of Bible dictionaries and the definition of apostasy. In Nelson's New Christian Dictionary, it says a total renunciation of the Christian faith. Not just leaving the truth, but leaving anything associated with the Christian faith by a baptized person, or desertion by a professed religious person who had taken perpetual vows. But a total renunciation of the Christian faith, not just of the truth as we understand it. Another definition, the act of rebelling against or forsaking or abandoning or falling away from what one has believed. At one point in time you believed this, and when you move away from that, whatever it is that you believed is a form of apostasy or a form of falling away. So it's a much broader definition of the word. Hastings' Bible Dictionary, 1963, talks about a defection from the tenets of a religious group. In other words, you leave what a group once believed and you go someplace else. And it's not just limited to the truth as we understand it. Now let's look at some translations, different translations of the word apostasia, and how it's translated in different versions of the Bible. And I think you'll find this instructive. The New King James actually translates the phrase slightly differently. The Old King James says, except there come a falling away. In other words, there could be several different falling aways. However, the New King James says the falling away. So it limits it to a particular thing. That day will not come except there come the falling away or a falling away. Now, which one of these is more accurate? The Weymouth translation says it cannot come unless the apostasy comes first. So again, focusing on a singular event, a major event, as we will see. The Williams translation says the falling away cannot take place until a great revolt occurs, or Christ cannot come, until the great revolt comes first. Again, some particular dramatic effect. The Moffat translation, Christ will not come till the rebellion. The rebellion. And what happened in the Church of God was a rebellion or a falling away. In the first century, Paul mentions that there was a falling away, that all those in Asia have fallen away. So there have been a number of falling aways down through the centuries. However, as you'll see, these translations begin to focus on the rebellion, some major great event. The 20th century New Testament says, for the return of Christ will not come until after the great apostasy. The great apostasy. The Phillips translation, Christ will not return before there arises a definite rejection of God. When the world begins to turn away from God. Now, they may use God's name, but in everything that they say and do, they basically are going contrary to God and His ways. This is what the verse really begins to focus on. The New English Bible says that that day when Christ returns cannot come before the final rebellion against God. The final rebellion. Again, in Paul's day there was a rebellion against God. Down through history there have been rebellions against God. But this says the final rebellion. So you see what's happening when we look at the big picture of these translations, different translations of the word apostasia. We see that they're all focusing on a major event that's going to just precede the return of Jesus Christ. The Living Letters. First, there will be a time of great rebellion against God. You know, we're living in a period of time when the United States and the Western world is turning away from God in many, many ways, as we will see in just a little bit. But this is the picture that emerges when we look at a number of different translations. And falling away which the King James translates from apostasia. When it's looked at it from a number of different directions, it's talking about a great event, a great end-time event of final rebellion against God. And this is what emerges when we look at a number of different translations of the word apostasia. If you look in Hastings Bible Dictionary under the definition of apostasy, this is the definition, and it's very interesting. It's informative. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3, which the Revised Standard Version calls a rebellion, it describes a defection of Christians which was to accompany the man of lawlessness. In other words, it doesn't come later, it doesn't come long before, it says to accompany. As we will see, this is what the verse is actually focusing on, some event that accompanies the man of sin. It doesn't come a long time before or a long time later. This expectation that the return of Christ to establish his kingdom will be preceded by violent activity on the part of his superhuman opponent, that is Satan. And that's what many of the scriptures focus on. And that would result in an abandonment of the Christian faith by many nominal Christians. Now, when people in the worldwide Church of God turned away, they abandoned the teachings of the church. Many people may not have really been converted. That's a judgment that God will make. But the dictionary basically focuses on the abandonment of the Christian faith by many nominal Christians. You know, when you look back at the conversions in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, and the forced conversions under Charlemagne and other Holy Roman emperors, many of those people merely changed their spots. They continued to follow pagan customs, but they were baptized and they were counted, quote unquote, as Christians. But they were really nominal Christians. And the same thing is probably going to happen as we get close to the end of the age. But this is how the Hastings Bible Dictionary defines an apostasy, an abandonment of the Christian faith, not just the truth as we understand it. And we'll see this illustrated a little bit later. The Expositor's Bible Commentary has, I think, a very informative commentary on 2 Thessalonians 2:3. And I want to read it. It says, 2 conspicuous phenomena will dominate the day of the Lord's opening phase. In other words, just prior to the return of Jesus Christ, we're going to see 2 conspicuous phenomena at that time. The falling away and the appearance of the man of sin. These are the 2 events. The apostasy or rebellion points to a deliberate abandonment of a former professed position. In other words, at one point in time you believe this, or people believe this, and they will shift over here to a new position, something that they had not believed before. And we're going to see how that is happening today. And we can speculate as to how it will happen in the future. Conditions will be ripe for people, especially those who call themselves Christians, to turn their backs on God. This worldwide anti-God movement. Now, this is the commentary's description. A worldwide anti-God movement of what Paul is describing here in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 will be so universal as to earn for itself a special designation, the apostasy. As we'll see, as we saw, the various translations of falling away or apostasia talk about the rebellion, the apostasy. The presence of such an apostasy and counterfeit God will not escape international observation. And this appears to be why Paul was saying in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, don't be deceived. Christ will not return until these 2 things happen. These 2 conspicuous events, this falling away or this rebellion against God, and the revealing of this man of sin is going to be involved with miracles and so on. But this is, I think, a very informative description of what Paul is talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. And this is much bigger than the idea that something that happened in the worldwide Church of God that affected a relatively small number of people, that somehow that was the fulfillment of what Paul was talking about. It really doesn't fit with the facts. It fits with an assumption that some people would like to read into that verse. Okay, summarizing here very quickly at this point, the content of 2 Thessalonians 2:3 indicates the great rebellion against God will occur in conjunction with the activities of the man of sin at the end of the age, just before Jesus Christ returns. In other words, there are going to be two events occurring about the same time. Revelation 13, now this is what Jesus Christ revealed to John in the book of Revelation. Revelation 13 indicates the man of sin will deceive the world into worshiping the beast. The man of sin and the beast will be working together. Both the man of sin and the beast are empowered by Satan. Satan is going to be influencing the activities of both of these individuals in direct contradiction to God and His way. And this appears to be the great rebellion, the great falling away that was prophesied in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. When you have Satan influencing a man of sin and the beast, those activities are going to sway the world, as we will see. And this appears to be what Paul is talking about. It's a great big event. It's of global significance, not just something that happened in the worldwide church of God. Looking at the man of sin very briefly, in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, this man of sin is described as a lawless person that disregards the law of God, that exalts himself above God, sits in the temple as God. Now, this appears to be a reconstructed temple in Jerusalem with signs and wonders. This individual is going to be doing signs and wonders or be associated with signs and wonders. And this person is going to be destroyed at Christ's second coming. And Mr. DeKoch didn't do any signs and wonders. He was not destroyed at Christ's second coming. So Mr. DeKoch doesn't fulfill these particular words in these verses. So that's not a correct understanding. In Daniel, it talks about a king that exalts himself above God and blasphemes God. Or in Revelation 13, this beast that's talked about is worshipped and blasphemes. And that appears to be the same person that Daniel was talking about. Revelation 13 talks about a false prophet. Revelation 13 talks about a beast and a false prophet. The false prophet is the one that does great signs and wonders and deceives the world to worship the beast and receive his mark. In Revelation chapter 19, verse 20, it says the beast and the false prophet who does signs. So it's the false prophet that does these signs. And then he points people to the beast. They're both cast into the lake of fire. It's not real clear that 2 Thessalonians is talking about either the beast or the false prophet. The important thing is these two individuals are going to work together. The Church of God position has been that the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2 is the false prophet. Some people say that the man of sin is the beast. Like I said, there's going to be two individuals involved. The Expositor's Bible Commentary, and again, this is not inspired, but it's just another view, says that the man of sin is the false prophet, the second beast of Revelation 13, who presides over the religious apostasy and cooperates with the first beast who leads the political opposition to God and aids his dominance over the governments of the world. And the important thing is there's going to be two individuals. This beast who will be a political leader, and then this false prophet who does miracles is going to be working with the beast. And I think that's the important thing to remember. In terms of the duality of prophecy, so again, we want to look at the big picture. While we have seen a falling away in the Church of God in recent years, and this occurred in 1995, but it was building before that, and the repercussions occurred even after that. But we have seen a falling away in the Church of God, where the church changed many doctrines, and this impacted a lot of people. Mr. Armstrong did not apply the falling away mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 to church members who knew the truth and fell away. Mr. Armstrong applied the term to the whole world. He talked about a universal apostasy that is coming, yet in the future. There's clearly a duality in prophecy. Now, we've seen a falling away in the church. The 2 Thessalonians 2:3 talks about a big one coming. The Apostle Paul had a falling away in his time, and there have been other fallings away down through history. Now let's look at some of the words that are used. New Testament, the word apostasia. Some say that when it's translated falling away, it can only be from the truth. But when you look at the way the word is used in the New Testament and the way similar words are used in the Old Testament, this argument doesn't hold up. Apostasy and falling away are not used exclusively to refer to a falling away from the truth or a falling away from the church. It's used in different ways. In Acts 21:21, Paul is accused of teaching the Jews to forsake Moses. Now the word there is apostasia. But when you look and you read the verse, what Paul is being accused of is telling the Jews they don't have to be circumcised. So it's not falling away from the church or falling away from the truth as we understand it. Paul was being accused of teaching the Jews to forsake or apostatize or fall away from Moses' teaching about circumcision. And this becomes clear in some of the other translations. He says Paul was accused of teaching the Jews to break away from Moses, to turn away from Moses, or disregard the laws of Moses, not just the truth as we understand it. In the Old Testament, the word Nepal can mean fall down or fall away. Now notice here it's being used not about people falling away from the truth or falling away from the church. In 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 11, it talks about deserters who deserted to the king of Babylon, traitors, people that left the nation and went with an enemy. And you'll notice some of the other translations translate the word Nepal to fall away. It talks about fugitives in the King James that fell away to the king of Babylon, not leaving the church, not leaving the truth. They were falling away to the king of Babylon. They were traitors. The Amplified Version says deserters who fell away to the king of Babylon, translating this word Nepal, which can be translated fall away or fall down. The New International Version, those who had gone over to, they had left their nation and went over to another nation. Another word, musaba, can be translated backslide, faithlessness, apostasy, or turn away. And in Jeremiah 2:19 it says, Israel's backslidings that include forsaking God will rebuke you. Their backslidings, they're turning away. And again, other translations bring that out. Amplified says your backsliding and desertion of the faith. Your apostasies, see, you're falling away from the faith, will reprove you. Another translation of the same word, another verse, Jeremiah 5, says there, Israel's backslidings, their turning away, have increased. Amplified says their backslidings and total desertion of the faith. Just turning away from everything, not just the truth as we understand it. Their apostasies are numerous. I think one or two more of these definitions. Hosea 14, verse 4, God says, I will heal Israel's backslidings. I will heal their apostasy. I will heal their turning away. Amplified says, I will heal their faithlessness. I will heal their waywardness, and I will heal their apostasy. So in all these cases, the word that can be translated falling away or apostasy is translated and is applied to a number of different situations. So when we consider the evidence of grammar, when we look at scriptures that are used in history, there appear to be three candidates. Now we could come up with more candidates, but I just want to focus on three for the purpose of instruction. I want to look at three candidates for the end time falling away. The first one is the falling away in the worldwide Church of God. That falling away that occurred in a more formal way in 1995, but something that had been building for 10 years or more before that. That was significant for members of the Church of God. We had about 150,000 people that attended the feast in 1993, 94, 95. When things began to change, a lot of people left. People went in different directions. Some people got confused. It was a very traumatic event for the members of the Church of God. But again, we only had about 150,000 people coming to the feast. There were 6 billion people on Earth at that time. So really a relatively small event on the world's radar screen, so to speak. Many people had no idea what was happening in the Church of God. This falling away was not noticed by the world, and it was not accompanied by a man of sin that was working miracles. I think that's important to understand. Paul talks about in 2 Thessalonians 2 that the return of Christ would not happen until the falling away occurred and a man of sin is revealed. And there would be miracles happening that would lead people astray. That did not happen in 1995. That did not happen. There was no man of sin revealed that was going to have an impact on the world at that time. So that really doesn't apply. It doesn't explain, doesn't fit with what Paul is talking about, as we will see. That falling away in the worldwide Church of God affected about 150,000 people. Now that looks like a big number, but we've got to keep it in perspective. Jesus Christ was asked in Matthew 24, what's going to be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus talked about a number of things that were going to be happening increasingly on a global scale, like nothing that ever happened before, something very unique. So what happened in the worldwide Church of God was significant for people in the Church of God at that time. But the world took no notice. It was not a sign to them of anything. We look at another example. Bible prophecies indicate that the Israelite nations will fall away or forsake or apostatize from God, His laws, and His covenant in the last days. The Bible prophecies are very clear on that, beginning with Moses, about 1400 BC. That the Israelite nations towards the end of the age would fall away from God. Let's notice a couple of these scriptures. In Deuteronomy 31:29, Moses says there, and you might want to read this so that you can see for yourself what Moses was talking about 1400 years BC. He says, after my death, he said, you will become utterly corrupt, and you will turn aside, you will turn away, and evil will befall you in the latter days. So there is to be an end-time apostasy of the Israelite nations that the Bible talks about in numerous places. In Jeremiah 30, it says, it talks about the time of Jacob's trouble will come. Your sins have increased, and when you sin, you're turning away from God. You're turning away from His laws. You're despising His laws. But Jeremiah talked about a time of Jacob's trouble will come. Your sins have increased. In the latter days, you will consider it. The very last verse in chapter 30, Jeremiah makes this statement, in the latter days, you will consider what I'm talking about. You will come to understand what I'm talking about. It's going to be a time of Jacob's trouble. And your sins are going to culminate at that time. And there's going to be serious consequences of that. Let's look at a couple of examples of what has happened in the United States over the last 200 years, but it's been building in the last 20, 30, 40 years. The American colonies began on a foundation of Christian values, and those values were based on the Bible. The Pilgrims that landed in Plymouth in Massachusetts in 1620, many of those people on that boat were from Cambridge University, a Puritan school, Emmanuel College. They were bringing their religion. They were bringing their religion to New England. And many of those colonists were Christians. The majority of them were Christians. So the American colonies were founded on Christian values based on the Bible. This is a fact of history. Patrick Henry made the statement in 1776, this great nation was not founded by religionists, but by Christians. This is the heritage of America, the heritage of the United States. It was founded that way, on biblical principles. James Madison, one of the early presidents, he said, we have staked the future of all our political constitutions on the capacity of each of ourselves to govern ourselves according to the moral principles of the Ten Commandments. This is what many of our early founders believed. This was our foundation that the nation was built upon. I'm making a point here for a number of reasons. When you look at the foundation of American education, every American college prior to the Revolutionary War except one, so prior to 1776, was founded by a Christian church. The basis of our educational system was on Christian values. Before the Civil War, 92% of colleges, 167 out of 182, colleges and universities were founded by Christian churches in America. They weren't secular for the most part. They were founded by churches and for the purpose of training and educated ministry. That's why they were founded. The Harvard Student Handbook in 1636, it might be interesting to compare what is in a Harvard Student Handbook today, but it said, "Let every student consider well the main end of his life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ." The very purpose of life is to know God and Jesus Christ. That wouldn't fly very well today, not only at Harvard but at many other schools. But this was where our nation was founded. This is where our nation came from. This was the founding values that our nation was built upon. For over 100 years, 50%, more than 50% of Harvard graduates became preachers, became pastors. In fact, some of the early graduates of Harvard University were known as the sons of the prophets. When you go to the Old Testament and you look at the schools of the prophets founded by Samuel, the people that he worked with were referred to as the sons of the prophets. That's where this terminology came from. And it was incorporated in Harvard University from the very beginning. But what has happened? In 1782, Congress of the United States recommends and approves the Holy Bible for use in all schools. Again, this was just after the Revolution. This shows where the minds of our leaders were. They wanted to lay a firm foundation. McGuffey readers, now these were used for over 100 years in American public schools and sold over 125 million copies. This is how many children in the United States learned to read from these McGuffey readers. McGuffey, in one of the early editions of his reader, he says, "The Christian religion is the religion of our country." Now let that burn deeply into your mind, because things have changed and changed drastically. The Christian religion is the religion of our country. From it are derived our notions of the character of God. People were encouraged to develop the character of God, to be honest, to be upright, to follow the laws of God. On its doctrines are founded the peculiarities of our free institutions. From all these extracts from the Bible that McGuffey recorded in his reader, he says, "I make no apology," because we're a Christian nation. We're using Christian principles. This is where our nation has come from. But notice what has happened to American education. Many American educational institutions founded by churches, notice the terms here because I'm pulling these quotes from a book, have abandoned their Christian foundations. Many American educational institutions founded by churches have abandoned, they've fallen away, they've turned away from their Christian foundations. Other colleges with Christian ties have largely deserted, again I'm using the terms of the author of the book, largely deserted their Christian allegiance. And finally, despite this massive departure of so many formerly Christian colleges from their original charters, they would not exist without their Christian forebearers. And these terms, having abandoned their Christian foundation, largely deserted their Christian allegiance, and massive departure, come from the book entitled How Christianity Changed the World, 2004. This is what has happened to American education, but what about American politics? And what has happened to American society? These are things that many of you are living through today. We're watching these happen. These things happen. We've watched this happen for a number of years. In the last 50 years, America has been subjected to what some people have called an American Inquisition, as atheists and secular humanists have tried to obliterate the nation's Christian heritage. They want to get rid of the definition of marriage. They want to get rid of anything that smacks of Christianity. And they've even tried to criminalize the practice of Christianity. You can't pray, you can't do this, you can't do that. Now, I've listed here just a number of things that have happened over the last 40 to 50 years. 1963, Bible reading and prayer was banished from schools. I grew up going to high school, led devotions over a PA system in the high school that I went to. Can't do that anymore. In America, founded on Christian principles. 1965, students' personal prayer was declared unconstitutional. A kid was actually praying in a cafeteria, and some people objected to that. 1980, the Ten Commandments were outlawed in public buildings, could not be displayed publicly. And yet in 1782, the Congress had actually said that they wanted Bibles distributed in schools, permitted that. 2010, students were dismissed and teachers have been fired for quoting the Bible. You can quote all kinds of things, but you can't quote the Bible. Or having a Bible in class. A teacher was actually dismissed for having a Bible on his or her desk in a classroom. And this is in America. This is what's happening today. Nativity scenes, Christmas scenes have been banned. Now we all understand that Christ was not born on Christmas, but many people view Christmas as a Christian thing because they don't understand the background. But in a nation that's supposedly Christian, nativity scenes have been banned in many cities. People are told they can't say Merry Christmas anymore. Corporations are doing that to people that they employ. They have to say Happy Holidays. So they can't use Christian terminology as the world understands it. Marriage is being redefined. The Bible defines marriage as between a man and a woman. Congress even passed an act, the Defense of Marriage Act, defining marriage as being between a man and woman. I just read today that a U.S. federal court has said that that's discriminatory. See, it discriminates against homosexuals. Now, the Supreme Court has yet to act on that particular decision being appealed. Same-sex marriage is being approved today, and yet the Bible says some very definite things about not doing same-sex marriage. It says it's an abomination, but this is what's happening in America. Homosexuality is being accepted and promoted in schools by teachers as an alternative lifestyle that's normal, natural, and healthy. It is none of the above. It's not normal, it's not natural, and it's not healthy. But this is the lie that is being promoted today in a nation that was once founded on Christian biblical principles. This is what has happened in our nation. Some have even gone to court over the phrase on our coins, "In God we trust," and the phrase in our Pledge of Allegiance, "One nation under God." This has been challenged in court in recent years by people who want that removed. They want any reference to God and being a nation under God removed, under the threat of law. This is what's happening in America. As I've mentioned several times, America was founded as a Christian nation. But not too long ago, our president made a statement something like this: "Whatever we once were, we are no longer a nation of Christians. We are also a Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu nation, and a nation of unbelievers." Has America fallen away? You can answer the question for yourself. Our nation is very different today and is becoming very different from what we were 50 years ago. America has definitely fallen away from our foundation, from a biblical foundation. But is that the falling away described in the Bible? Let's go back to 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Jesus said, Christ's return, the return of Jesus Christ, will be preceded by two major signs: a great falling away, a great rebellion against God, and the appearance of a man of sin and working miracles to deceive the whole world. These are the two things that Paul said would occur. Neither the falling away in the church of God, nor the prophesied falling away of the Israelite nations meets these criteria. Neither were accompanied by a man of sin and the working of miracles that just astounded people. Those things did not happen with either of the falling away in the church of God or the falling away in the Israelite nations today. That has yet to happen. That has yet to happen. So neither of these examples can be the end time falling away. They were types, but they are not what Paul is talking about, as we will see. A third candidate. There is a third candidate for this falling away. The prophesied end time falling away will be a worldwide anti-God movement, and we will see this is going to fit with other scriptures. Associated with the Satan-inspired activities of a beast and a miracle-working false prophet. See, these have yet to occur. These have yet to appear on the world scene. And the Satan-inspired activities of the beast and the miracle-working false prophet will deceive the world into rejecting the fundamentals of biblical Christianity. They'll probably use God's name. They'll probably talk about Jesus Christ. And they'll probably talk about the Bible. But they're not going to agree with the Bible. They're not going to be teaching the Christianity of Jesus Christ. And they're not going to be worshiping the God of the Bible. This end-time falling away is going to impact billions of people. Revelation 13 talks about the world followed the beast because of the miracles of the false prophet pointing people to the beast. It said the world is going to be impacted. And there are currently about 7 billion people on the face of the earth. It's probably not going to affect everybody, but it's going to affect large numbers of people. And this appears to be this great rebellion that Paul was talking about. Okay, the end time falling away. Let's look at some other scriptures that focus on the end time. And we'll see that what Paul is talking about fits with these other scriptures. You can't take 2 Thessalonians 2:3 out of context of the other scriptures that Jesus Christ mentioned and other scriptures that Paul mentions. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus was asked, what's going to be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And he says, my return is going to be preceded by a number of very dramatic events, wars, rumors of wars, and so on. But he says, you're going to see false prophets working great signs and wonders. They're going to deceive many people. And my return is going to be like a thief in the night. People are not going to be expecting it. So notice these words that Jesus uses. His return is going to be accompanied by false prophets, great signs, many deceived, and it's going to be like a thief in the night. When you go to 1 Thessalonians 5:1, Paul talks about there, Christ's return is going to be like a thief in the night. So he's referring basically to the same terminology, using the same terminology that Jesus used, for things are going to occur just before his return. In 2 Thessalonians, Paul says again, Christ's return is going to be accompanied by a falling away, or this great rebellion. There's going to be a man of sin involved, and there's going to be great signs and wonders being done just before Christ returns. Paul is talking about in 1 Thessalonians 5 and 2 Thessalonians 2, the very same time period that Jesus Christ was talking about in Matthew 24. Then you go to Revelation chapter 13, where Jesus is revealing these things to John. He talks about a beast. Revelation 13 talks about a false prophet doing great signs and wonders. They're both influenced by Satan. And it says the world will follow the beast. This is a great, huge movement. And when you're following a beast and a false prophet influenced by Satan, you are literally turning away from God. You're falling away from any semblance of biblical Christianity. This is a big event. Again, notice what Paul says. Notice the terminology here. This is what we have to go on. Let no one deceive you by any means. And some people have been deceived today, thinking that the falling away has already occurred, thinking that Mr. Dukoch was the man of sin, but he did no miracles. He sat in no temple of God. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of Christ's return, will not come unless the falling away comes first, unless there's this great rebellion and this man of sin is revealed. These two events are going to go together, the son of perdition. What are the implications then? Why is it important to understand this concept and this idea of what the falling away actually involves? Ezekiel basically was told by God, your job is to be a watchman, to warn about a coming falling away and a great rebellion against God that is coming in the days just ahead. He said people are going to be turning away. Part of our job today as a watchman is to warn people about what is coming. Matthew 24, Jesus said these things are going to come. Paul mentions in 1 Thessalonians 5, 2 Thessalonians 2, these events are going to come. And people in the church need to be aware of what's coming so we don't get caught up in deceptions of one type or another. Assuming the falling away has already happened will prevent us from delivering this important end-time message. Well, it's already happened. We don't have to worry about that. Now we just have to worry about some other things. It's going to be very dangerous to buy into that idea. There is a great rebellion coming. And just like Mr. Armstrong did, we need to be warning the world about what is coming. It's going to be big. It's going to impact the world. There's going to be a false prophet doing miracles. And people are going to think, well, he says he's the one, he says he's the vicar of Christ. He says he belongs to the one true church. He's doing miracles. Maybe he really is. Many people are going to be deceived by that, and people in the world will be deceived, but many people in the church that are nominal Christians may also be deceived by that. So we've got to be alert. We've got to be warning, not just the church, but the world. Clarifying this issue and powerfully delivering this prophetic warning about a universal falling away from the fundamentals of biblical Christianity, led by a beast and a man of sin working miracles, will clearly set the living church of God apart from false prophets and false apostles who preach the falling away has already occurred. This is going to be an issue that will separate the living church of God from others who are preaching something very different. Understanding the roles that the beast and the man of sin and the working of miracles will play in bringing about the falling away, this great rebellion against God in the last days. These are keys to understanding where and when this falling away will occur. It's got to occur in conjunction with the man of sin and the miracles. The falling away has to occur at that time, not before it, not after that, but in conjunction with it. This is why a correct understanding of the falling away is important, to understand these things. It'll enable the living church of God to deliver a very powerful warning about a major prophetic end-time event that is coming in the years just ahead. It's not something that's already happened. It's something that's going to happen and impact the world. It's also going to set the living church of God apart from false teachers who are saying this event has already happened, because that doesn't fit with the other prophecies by Jesus Christ. It doesn't fit with the prophecies of the book of Revelation. Okay, why the confusion today in the church? Because this has been an issue that has confused some and divided the church. Some assume that the falling away only applies to events that have occurred in the church of God. And I've tried to show in this presentation it's much bigger than that. This idea that the falling away occurred in the church of God first appeared in a series of letters published about 1987, where Mr. DeKoch was referred to as the man of sin, and the temple that the man of sin would sit in was suggested there to be the church of God or the auditorium in Pasadena. And these letters were circulated to many ministers in the church of God, including the ministers that lead the Philadelphia Church of God and the Restored Church of God. Whether they read them or not is not clear, but those ideas, some of the ideas, have been picked up by one or the other of these men. But this idea did not originate with either of these men. It originated several years earlier, maybe a decade earlier or more. This perspective that the falling away only could occur in the church of God, and that Mr. DeKoch was the man of sin, takes 2 Thessalonians 2 totally out of its biblical and its historical content. Because it doesn't agree with what Jesus was talking about. It doesn't agree with what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 5, or 1 Thessalonians 5, or 2 Thessalonians 2. And it doesn't agree with what is talked about in Revelation 13. They all appear to be talking about the same major event that's going to occur just before Jesus Christ returns. In Matthew 24, and again we've gone over this, but just to review, Jesus warned his disciples of major events, false prophets, great signs, an abomination in the temple, and a return as the thief, that he would return as a thief. That's what he's talking about in Matthew 24. And Paul is talking about something very similar in 1 Thessalonians 5. He's warning the church about the day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night, when they talk about peace and safety, but there's going to be destruction. And then in 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul warned the church about prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there would be this great falling away, a great rebellion. A man of sin would sit in the temple. Great signs would be done. And this man of sin would be destroyed at Christ's return. So these are things that have yet to happen. Jesus, Paul, we're all talking about the same thing. The prophecies of Jesus and Paul refer to a major end-time event or major end-time events that will precede the return of Jesus Christ. He's not talking about events that would happen centuries before or centuries later. These things are going to happen together. It's going to have an impact on the world. Otherwise, these major events could not be signs that Christ's return was imminent. The falling away in the Worldwide Church of God happened in 1995. 15 to 20 years ago. The falling away in Paul's time happened almost 2,000 years ago. These are types, but they're not the ultimate fulfillment of what Paul was talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2. Now, some people say that the falling away will occur and then the man of sin will be revealed and that they don't really happen together. But this doesn't fit with the structure of 2 Thessalonians 2:3. And this comes from the Expositor's Bible Commentary. It says there are grammatically similar constructions where two events occur together that are mentioned in the Bible in other places. One case was Mark chapter 2, verse 27, where Jesus in a parable says, if you're going to bind before you break into or plunder the house of a strong man, you have to bind him. So these two events have to occur together. You don't bind the strong man, leave him bound up for 10 or 15 years and then plunder his house. No, you're going to do those things together. You'd be found out if these events took place with years in between. But this is just one example of where the Bible talks about two events, but they're occurring together to make any sense. In Romans 15, Paul makes the statement there. He says, when I journey to Spain, I will come to you. He's talking about two events. But he doesn't say, when I journey to Spain, maybe 10 or 15 years later, I'm going to come and visit you. What he's saying is, when I make the journey to Spain, I will come and visit you. It's a link between these two things. They're linked together. There's not years in between. So the commentary basically says grammatically similar constructions that we find in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 show these two events, the falling away, the rebellion, and the revealing of the man of sin. These two happenings are conceived of as within the day of the Lord, not prior to it, not 10 or 15 years earlier, because these two conspicuous phenomena will dominate the day of the Lord's opening phase. It's going to be these two things. This great rebellion against God, which will culminate then as this man of sin does these miracles, and the man of sin and the beast, being influenced by Satan, are going to pull the world away from God. This is the great falling away. This is the great rebellion. It's not just something that happened in the worldwide church of God. There are a number of biblical admonitions that I want to go through here at the end of the sermon. And I would encourage you to look these things up. In Matthew 24, it mentions there that Jesus Christ was asked by his disciples, what's going to be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And he mentions about not being deceived. Many will come in my name. Many will come in my name, claiming to be ministers of God, claiming to be instruments in God's hand. But they're going to be preaching something very different that really doesn't fit with the Scriptures. He says there are going to be false prophets that will be working miracles. So he's warning about these things, and we need to be aware of those. In 1 Thessalonians 5:21, he says, prove all things, examine everything. Look at the Scriptures, look at the definitions, look at the different translations, look at everything. Get the big picture so that you understand. And we tried to do that in the presentation today. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 9, Paul is giving some instructions there that we also need to look at. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 9, he says we need to hold fast to the faithful word as he has been taught. And Mr. Armstrong was preaching back in the late 40s and the early 50s and through the 60s that the falling away was going to be a worldwide event. He did not apply that to something that would just happen in the Church of God. Some people have forgotten, or people maybe didn't know these things. But Paul is admonishing Titus. He says, you need to hold fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convict those who contradict, and to teach that the falling away has already occurred, to teach that Mr. DeKoch was the man of sin. These are contradictions to what the Bible actually says and what the church has actually taught over the years and what the church is teaching today. In 1 Timothy 6:20, another admonition, Paul mentions as he concludes the letter to Timothy, he says, O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust. You guard the truth. Don't get pulled off in some of these other different ideas that people like to claim and make themselves different from everybody else. He told Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and idle babblings, these crazy ideas and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. He said, you need to guard what is committed to you. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 14 through 17, he's talking about to diligently study the Word of God, a worker who's not divided, who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing, correctly explaining the word of truth. We need to study the Scriptures, be able to explain the truth, and not be carried away by other ideas. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, Paul is telling Timothy here, he says, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Paul says, therefore I remind you, Timothy, to stir up the gift of God. That's God's Spirit. He says, stir that up by praying and studying and fasting, which is in you by the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of fear or doubt. I've talked to a number of people and say, I'm not sure where the church is, and I'm not sure what's happening in the church. If you're close to God, you're using God's Spirit, you shouldn't be in a condition of doubt. God has not given us a spirit of fear or doubt, but of power. That's conviction. That's confidence. I know where the church of God is. I know what the truth is. And of love. This is an unselfish, outgoing concern where you care for people. You don't want to see people confused. And of a sound mind, a discerning mind. And I hope in going through these scriptures today, looking at the various translations, the various definitions, the various examples from history, that you should be able to discern what the truth is about this falling away, this great rebellion. But Paul says that the gift of God's Spirit is a discerning mind, able to discern what the truth is. In 1 John chapter 4, John was advising the church there to try the spirits. What are the fruits of the people preaching these different ideas? Examine the fruits. Examine the fruits. And he also talks about in verse 6 there in 1 John 4, you need to be able to discern a spirit of truth from a spirit of error. To discern a spirit of truth from a spirit of error. Mr. DeKoch was not the great false prophet. He did no miracles. The great falling away is going to be just before the return of Jesus Christ. It's going to be driven by the miracles worked by this false prophet and this beast. It's not something that's already happened. So these are things we need to be aware of. In 2 Peter chapter 3, let's conclude with that. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, Peter was warning the church. He says, therefore, you beloved, since you know this beforehand, See, Paul has told us what's going to happen. Jesus told us what's going to happen. Since you know this beforehand, beware lest you fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the error of the wicked, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be glory both now and forever. So these are admonitions that we find in the Scriptures. If we summarize very quickly, a correct understanding of the falling away, this great apostasy, this final rebellion against God, is not just an academic matter. It's not just for scholars to debate. Self-appointed false teachers have used this issue to confuse and divide the church of God. And this has gone on for a number of years. Jesus said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. When you understand that this great falling away is something that's going to happen and impact the world, it's going to be driven by a beast, a political leader, and a great false religious leader who's going to do miracles. When you understand the truth of that, you're not going to be led astray. Some final thoughts. I would encourage all of you to pray for spiritual discernment. God, show me your truth. Help me to understand what is right and what is wrong. Pray that God would help you to sort through the confusion and division that has split the church of God into many, many, many parts. But it's possible to be led by God's Spirit to find out where the truth is, where the church is. Pray that you can avoid being caught up as the Israelite nations turn away from their founding biblical principles. Because there's going to be arguments, there's going to be reasonings that will get people to move in different directions. We don't want to get caught up in that. We don't want to get caught up in the divisions of the church of God. And pray that God will help you recognize this great apostasy that's going to come, led by a beast and a miracle-working false prophet who is influenced by Satan, who will lead the world in a final rebellion against God. Ask God to guide you, to protect you, and to lead you. Jesus mentions in Luke 21, verse 36, he says, watch and pray that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and stand before the Son of Man. Brethren, I hope that what we've covered this afternoon will be clear for you about what this falling away really is, how it's been used to deceive the world, and I would encourage you, study your Bible and don't you fall away.